I'm Emily Chang in New York, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, retaliation. Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou is suing Canada, alleging she was wrongfully detained. Will this set off another diplomatic firestorm? Plus, the countdown is on. Tesla announces a date to unveil its Model Y crossover. Is demand really there? And pushing for change, hundreds of Amazon employees, many of them working moms, are waging a campaign to convince CEO Jeff Bezos to offer a daycare benefit in the latest round of employee activism. But first to our top story, another twist in the Huawei saga. The CFO has filed a lawsuit against Canadian authorities, claiming she was illegally detained. And according to the New York Times, Canada isn't the only government Meng Wanzhou is going after. The company could be gearing up to sue the United States as well. Wanzhou was arrested in December after a request from the U.S. government. Canada has now agreed to the U.S.'s request for an extradition hearing. For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech Selena Wang in San Francisco, who has been following this story for us. So, Selena, what is the very latest behind this new lawsuit?
So Meng Wanzhou has sued Canada, saying that they unlawfully detained her and searched her. And this is a pretty interesting case because they're saying that when she was in Vancouver, they should have actually immediately arrested her, so she would have been granted her legal privileges. Instead, she's alleging that the Canada actually used the guise of a custom border patrol searching and used that as a way to detain her and unlawfully search her. And so that is the latest. Now, again, the big news here is that the Chinese government is saying that the two Canadian men who were arrested after Meng Wanzhou was arrested in December are now being accused of spying and stealing state secrets. And one of them was said that he had doing this while working with the International Crisis Group, and that the other man, who was an entrepreneur who ran towards North Korea, was actually this other man's primary contact and had supplied him with intelligence. So this behavior and the act of the Chinese government is really seen from the perspective of analysts as being upping the ante and really being a retaliatory tactic against what's happening to Meng Wanzhou.
How has Canada responded?
Now, Justin Trudeau has said that he's very disappointed by this and that Canada is going to follow the regular legal proceedings, saying that it's unfortunate China continues to move forward on these arbitrary detentions. Will continue to stand up for these Canadians. Now, Bloomberg had also earlier reported that the Royal Bank of Canada recently told employees to not travel to China and travel there with caution. Now, this comes after a government notice from January 14th urged Canadians to exercise a high degree of caution in China because of these arbitrary enforcements of laws. And now, in addition to the arrest of these two Canadians in China, there's also a man who's facing a potential death sentence over drug trafficking in China.
What's the timeline for this? Do we expect the extradition to proceed? Does it get delayed as a result?
Now, if history shows anything, the expectation is that she will eventually be extradited from Canada to the United States. However, this process is very long, it's very protracted. There's been incidences of this taking as long as a decade. And the length of time that this takes often depends on how much legal power and resources that the person on the other end has. And Meng Wanzhou obviously has a huge amount of financial resources to combat this and make sure that this is a long process, because China is going to do everything they can to make sure that she isn't extradited.
So talk to us about how this fits into the broader trade discussions. Could this set off another diplomatic firestorm?
I think it's fair to say that it's already set off quite a diplomatic firestorm. Now, there are reports from Bloomberg News today, according to sources, that the U.S. and China are actually quite close to reaching a trade deal that could take off all of the tariffs, or most of them, on the several $100 billion of Chinese goods. Now, Trump has said before that he would potentially intervene in this Huawei extradition case to get a good trade deal, because that's what he really cares about. But a lot of critics have said that he should really keep this trade negotiation completely separate from this legal proceeding. But on the other hand, some critics and analysts have noted that this Huawei case is really the biggest bargaining chip he has with China. There's a lot at stake here. In addition to the CFO, there's also a potential ban on all Huawei products in the United States. The future of Huawei and the 5G rollout is at stake here. So there's a lot of questions about how this case may be used in the broader trade negotiations.
All right, Bloomberg's Selena Wang for us in San Francisco. Selena, thank you so much for that update. Meantime, Tesla CEO Elon Musk tweeted Sunday that the company will reveal its Model Y crossover vehicle on March 14th. But the announcement, made just days after reveal of a cheaper Model 3, has investors worried about demand. Musk said, quote, Model Y, being an SUV, is about 10% bigger than Model 3, so will cost about 10% more and have slightly less range for same battery. This as concerns continue to rise over the car maker's online sales shift and employee layoffs. Joining us to discuss, ARK Invest CEO Kathy Wood. And Kathy, I know you're generally bullish on Tesla. Are you concerned about these things?
No, I think the mistake people are making here is Elon is riding down a technology cost curve. So prices should fall. They're going to fall and continue to fall because battery pack system prices are coming down.
But even he says making the car at this price is excruciatingly difficult.
And we talked about that. We had a podcast with him, and
yes,
before the podcast,
you and your colleagues flew out to Fremont and sat down with Musk in person.
Yeah. And he walked in, and the first thing he says is, you know, the traditional automakers, they are just unbelievable in terms of the way they cut costs. And what I said to him is, yeah, that's fine, but they haven't been riding down a technology cost curve for a century, right? You are riding down this battery pack system cost curve. Your prices will fall and continue to fall as theirs rise. So what he said on his last earnings call is the demand is there. People can't afford the high-end prices, so he's bringing prices down.
But can Tesla afford to deliver the car at that price?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think, well, you see the restructuring he's doing. I think is very sensible. I think he's making these moves in order to scale more quickly than he otherwise would, because these price points are very attractive to consumers out there.
So you don't have any concerns about him closing all these stores, shifting everything online so abruptly, and laying off people?
It was abrupt. We got the sense something was up because he is still competing against other auto manufacturers who have their costs screwed down. But at some point, his pricing is going to drop below theirs, well below theirs, just like because battery pack system costs are coming down. He's got his deep learning chip, which is going to help him with autonomous vehicles. So you know the story that we're telling, but we are not concerned. We're not concerned.
What was your impression meeting him in person at the factory?
You know what? I think people misunderstand him completely. You know, I just reflect upon how the clips about Joe Rogan's interview, there was one clip. No one has taken the time to listen to that.
This is the interview where he smoked pot for us.
Yeah.
You're right, it was one puff.
Saw. That's all people saw. No, you know, actually, shame on the news media for not actually delving into the Joe Rogan content and just listening to...
To be fair, though, you don't often see a CEO smoking pot in an interview.
Yeah, I mean, that was provocative, fine. Fine. But there was a 2.5-hour interview. There was real content there. And his brilliance was shining through it.
So what's your outlook on demand for the Model 3, cheaper Model 3, and the Model Y?
I think demand is, as prices come down, is going to be pretty explosive. On our podcast, and in our models, even before we talked to Elon about this, we believe that EV sales, as prices continue to come down, will scale from 1.3 million globally last year to 26 million in 5 years. And I asked Elon, what did he think about that? And he said, well, you might be off by a year or so, but yes, we are talking about exponential growth. And exponential growth happens because prices come down. This is a technology cost curve. Those who follow traditional auto manufacturers haven't seen one of these for a while. They don't know how to relate to it. And they assume that cutting prices means demand isn't there. That's absolutely untrue.
So what's your outlook for the rest of the FANG stocks? I mean, obviously, we've seen hundreds of billions of dollars wiped off the market caps of some of these companies. They've been refounded. Some, have different stories than others.
Yeah.
Where do you see the positives and the negatives?
Well, so you're right. They're all different stories. I don't know why we lump them into this acronym. We can treat each one differently. We don't own Facebook for the most part right now because we think they've got a lot to work through in terms of privacy. I remember anytime the regulators start going after an industry or a company, we kind of pull away for a while. Now, it is true that they're one of the few places for online advertising, as is Google. But now we see Amazon advertising pretty aggressively. I mean, its advertising sales are screaming. And I do think the whole online advertising market is continuing to grow very, very quickly at the expense now of television. So we're not worried about that. But whenever I see regulators going after a company, and I see what they're trying to do with blockchain technology, they probably want to get at more information on people, but allow them the privacy. So they're even trying to invest in this themselves.
You think there's going to be a crypto revolution?
Yes.
What does that mean? Especially as, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general haven't had a great run.
Well, they had a great run. So they went from, Bitcoin went from less than $1,000 to $20,000 in 2017, has come back to $3,000 to $4,000. During that downturn, what happened is Bitcoin's share of the entire crypto asset network value or ecosystem increased. That told us that Bitcoin is the reserve currency for the crypto asset ecosystem. That's a huge role. Last year, $1.3 trillion worth of transactions were on the Bitcoin network. Why? Venezuela and B2B, business to business, in Africa, where it's just prohibitively expensive to trade from one currency into another. So B2B, and the average transaction size is about $14,000. That's pretty amazing. This technology is really only 10 years old. We do think there's a crypto asset revolution, a blockchain revolution underway, yes.
All right, Kathy Wood, always good to have you here, hear your outlook. Thank you so much for stopping by. It's good to see you here in person.
Likewise, thank you.
Kathy Wood of ArkInvest. All right, coming up, progressive politics. In a short time, a very short time, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has taken center stage in Washington. We speak to her chief of staff about her agenda. This is Bloomberg. The Green New Deal is a sweeping proposal that outlines strategies and solutions to combat climate change, reduce income inequality, provide health care to all Americans, and much more. There are two resolutions for the legislation sponsored by Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts and newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. The representative has captured the attention of the nation since she defeated a 10-term incumbent by double digits, becoming the youngest woman ever to serve in Congress. Joining us now to discuss her agenda while in office, the Chief of Staff for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Shoykat Chakrabarti. Thank you so much for stopping by. Boy,
yeah.
It's been a ride for you, hasn't it?
It's been something, yeah.
You've been with her from the beginning.
Yeah, about almost 2 years now.
So what do you think it is about her that has just taken the nation by storm?
Well, she's actually presenting really new, refreshing ideas. You see her kind of week after week, month after month, putting new options on the table, putting new ideas on the table that completely change the course of the conversation of what's politically possible. So you saw that from the Green New Deal to the marginal tax rate to, even things like healthcare and other progressive policies. She's really pushing the debate, and people are engaged. Turns out people in this country actually want to talk about policy.
Everybody talks about her social media strategy. She's taken off on Twitter, but a lot of lawmakers use Twitter.
Yeah.
What makes her so special?
Well, I would say, again, it's the content is the thing that people really engage with.
But she's also unafraid.
And she's also unafraid. And that's part of it, because when you're pushing big, bold, brave ideas like she is, you've got to go at it with a bit of bravery and a bit of boldness and just actually defending it. You've got to actually defend it on its merits. You got to argue it. And she uses Twitter as a platform for communication, and it's two-way communication, not just one-way communication.
So let's talk about the merits of the Green New Deal.
Sure.
There are a lot of folks who say it is just too expensive. How do you respond to that?
So I find that kind of a funny argument, because it's really talking about a gigantic investment program. So we always talk about the Green New Deal as a mass-scale economic mobilization on the scale of World War II. So, there's all these sort of plans about decarbonizing the economy, and not even talking about the cost of inaction. If you look at the cost of action in this case, the cost of investment, there's examples from our history. So, the interstate highway system, for every dollar we spent on interstate highway system, we made $6, right? During World War II, that economic mobilization created the greatest middle class that the U.S. has ever seen. And there's Project Drawdown is another example. They have one version of how you could get to a fully decarbonized economy that they say is going to make about $43 trillion. So, so you have a big upfront capital investment, but you make money. Companies like Amazon actually understand that.
So let's talk about Amazon, because she was vocal about HQ2 not coming to New York City, and some folks would say this would have created a lot of jobs for a lot of people in Queens, and now that's not happening.
Sure.
Isn't that a loss?
So what she was vocal about was the process by which it happened. The deal was sort of sprung on the community without any input, and there's a real cost. Whenever tech companies come in without community input, rents go up, people get evicted. There's an actual human cost that is associated with Amazon coming in.
But isn't there a cost now that those jobs won't be coming?
Well, so Amazon is the company that chose to step away from the negotiating table. Once the community came to the table and started making their demands heard, Amazon said, no, we're not going to have it. They stepped away. If we can do it through a community process, if there's a way for the community to actually engage to make their demands heard, I think that would have been a better way to have done that.
Would you welcome Amazon back if they had a change of heart? I mean, Governor Cuomo is trying to backpedal.
Well, we'd welcome having a process, yes. We welcome having a community process, but I don't know where the talks are at this stage.
So let's talk about her tax proposal. Bill Gates has downplayed what he called extreme proposals. He didn't single hers out specifically, but he did tell The Verge this. I believe U.S. tax rates can be more progressive. Now you finally have some politicians who are so extreme that I'd say, no, that's even beyond. You do start to create tax dodging, disincentives, an incentive to have the income show up in other countries and things. But we can be more progressive without really threatening income generation. What you have left to decide is how to spread it around.
Yeah, so there's two pieces to this. One is, if you look back in our history again, right, we've had our top marginal tax rate has been as high as 90%. And in the greatest periods of our growth, historically, it's been much higher than it is right now. It's about 70, 80%. You have economists like Paul Krugman saying that 70% is about right. That's about where the top marginal tax rate should be. So she didn't just pull this number out of thin air. This is sort of what economists have been saying we need to get to fix the rampant inequality that we have in our country right now. The second piece, if you do a big investment program like the Green New Deal, so say you generate a whole lot of wealth, you grow the economy, you grow the pie, if all that new income is being captured by a few people at the top, which is sort of what we saw in the recovery from the recession. We saw about, I think, 110% of new wealth up through 2012 was captured by the top 10%. If you do that again, all you're going to do is have a few people get really wealthy, and the vast majority of people not seeing the economic benefits. So it's really necessary to set up the structures correctly, so that if you do grow the pie, if you do generate wealth, you're spreading it equitably.
This proposal would only cover a fraction of the initiatives that she has proposed. How does she plan to cover the rest?
So there's all kinds of ways to pay for wealth-generating investments, right? And that's what the Green New Deal is talking about. So, of course, tax revenue could be one way. Deficit spending could be one way, but it's sort of the same way that we paid for the massive amount of wealth we generated in World War II during the New Deal, the way we paid for the Republican tax cuts, the way we paid for getting the recovery after the recession. There's examples in other countries, for example, the European Investment Bank, right? They invest using that bank and make money back, and no one ever asks, well, where are you getting the money to pay for it? People understand it's wealth generating. You can pay for things when you make money back.
So President Trump has settled on a new line of attack, saying that the left has embraced socialism, total government domination.
Yeah, I mean, when Republicans have no attack to make, they just start calling everything socialist. They called Medicare socialist. They called Social Security socialist. It's probably a good sign. I mean, both those things worked out well, so maybe they should keep calling everything socialist and it'll work out. But, I think the thing that's particularly frustrating about that is if you look at sort of the system of economics that we're talking about, the way to get something like the Green New Deal accomplished, it's so incredibly American. It's the moonshot. It's what Alexander Hamilton talked about, one of our founding fathers. So it's really more like a return to the American system than it is whatever Trump thinks it is.
Does the Congresswoman plan to endorse anyone in the 2020 race?
She plans to hear him out for sure.
Do you think she'll pick a favorite?
I don't know, honestly. We haven't even had the first debate yet. And right now, the thing that I know she's excited about and that we're excited about is we're actually seeing a debate of ideas in the Democratic primary. And I think that's so interesting. You often get into these personality conflicts and kind of a debate of who is what. But right now, all these new ideas are coming out from, Elizabeth Warren's childcare policy to Bernie Sanders' free college plan. And we just love that.
Does she see room for center-left folks in the Democratic Party?
So it depends on what center-left means. If by center-left we're talking about people who are really out of touch with where the people are, because you're talking about policies like Medicare for All, 70% of the people are for Medicare for All, right? And if you look at the Democratic Party, it's close to like 90%. So the center-left there should be strongly for Medicare for All, right? But then if you kind of have this fringe group of conservative Democrats that don't represent where the people are, who aren't presenting new ideas, folks like Howard Schultz, she's not a fan of Howard Schultz because we're not hearing a single new idea from Howard Schultz. If he had an actual solution to problems we face, that'd be interesting. If you have a real solution, we're willing to debate on that. But if you don't bring any ideas to the table, then sorry.
All right. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. I know you're just as busy, if not more busy than she is. Shoykat Chakrabarti, Chief of Staff for Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much
for being here. All right, coming up, more tech earnings out this Monday. We will dig into Salesforce's results and outlook next. This is Bloomberg. Salesforce reporting earnings after the close Monday. The company says sales in the current quarter will be less than the $3.7 billion analysts were hoping for. The forecast highlights the challenge Salesforce faces to maintain its pace of growth over the last few quarters. The company also outlined longer-term sales goals, which requires spending more money on opening new offices and hiring. Operating expenses increased 32% to $2.52 billion in the quarter. And there is a corporate shakeup happening at Warner Media 8 months after AT&T spent $85 billion buying the company once known as Time Warner. Former NBC Entertainment chief Bob Greenblatt will run HBO, TNT, TBS, and True TV, while CNN President Jeff Zucker will now become chair of Warner Media News and Sports. And it is a key milestone for SpaceX and NASA. SpaceX's Crew Dragon unmanned craft successfully docked with the International Space Station over the weekend. The test flight paves the way for a manned mission planned for the summer. Keep in mind, SpaceX is competing with Boeing for business with NASA. And coming up, the U.S. government says Huawei is a national security threat. The CEO of Cisco, however, doesn't seem to agree. Who's got it right? We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology Global Link, where we join Bloomberg Daybreak Australia to bring you the latest in global tech news. I'm Emily Chang in New York with Sherry An and Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney. Let's take a look at the top global tech stories of the day. Sherry, what are you following?
Emily, a new report by cybersecurity firm McAfee is shedding light on North Korean hacking efforts. That includes attacks that occurred as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met with President Trump in Hanoi last week for denuclearization talks. That's according to the New York Times. The report also detailed that North Korean hacking is currently targeting other countries, quote, critical industries including the telecommunications, energy, government, and defense sectors. Alibaba has tagged Lazada CEO Pierre Poignan to lead its Southeast Asian expansion. E-commerce site Lazada sells 300 million products in 6 countries in the region. Alibaba acquired a controlling stake in the company in 2016. Southeast Asia remains a target for many e-commerce giants as there's no singular dominant player in the area. And Facebook may not operate in China, but that isn't stopping it from taking legal action against regional imposters. The social network is suing 4 companies and 3 individuals there for promoting the sale of fake accounts. The suit filed in a San Francisco court alleges that the fake accounts were marketed for sale on 6 websites over the last 2 years. And those are the top global tech stories we're watching. Emily.
Sherry, thank you. Well, the U.S. government is trying to ensure that the next generation of wireless technology, 5G, isn't dominated by China, specifically one company, and that is Huawei. One person who doesn't seem to share those fears is Cisco CEO Chuck Robbins, who told CNN on Sunday that, quote, the current infrastructure around the world is built on a combination of communication suppliers from Europe, from China, from the U.S., everywhere. And I think that despite everything that we hear, I think that's going to be the case in the future as well. Joining us to discuss the national security implications of 5G tech and Huawei is Jamil Jaffer, the Vice President for Strategy and Partnerships at IronNet Security, a tech startup founded by the former head of the NSA. He also was the chief counsel of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and joins us now from San Francisco. Jamil, we have switched spots today. So, given your extensive national security experience, do you think Huawei is a threat or not?
Absolutely, Emily. Look, Huawei's got a ton of issues. Ever since 2011, when the House Intelligence Committee issued a report looking at Huawei and talking about its extensive ties to the Chinese government, its role in economic espionage, it's likely benefiting from economic espionage by the Chinese government, as well as all the economic benefits it gets from the Chinese government, and its potential involvement in surveillance activities. Huawei definitely presents a potential threat to the United States and our allies across the globe.
Jamil, I suppose a question for telecom providers, and we saw this sentiment or heard this sentiment in Barcelona. What are the other options if not Huawei?
Well, it's a great question. Look, across the globe, there are a number of 5G players who could be very influential. The question just is, who do you want owning your infrastructure? Do you want a company that we know has close ties to the Chinese government, or do you want companies that are European or American, or in the case of Australia, from other areas of the globe also? So it's not just Huawei in particular, but it's the fact that they have these close ties to the Chinese government. If they're willing to be transparent about it and expose their connections and talk about them and say they won't do those things, well, that's a different matter. Their CEO, Reng Zhengfei, has refused to do so thus far.
So, Jamil, I just want to dig in a little bit here. You think Huawei is a threat, but what actual proof is there that Huawei is a threat?
Sure. Well, we've seen a number of things that Huawei has done over the years to benefit itself from Chinese government espionage. We've seen the fact it's interesting that the Cisco CEO isn't concerned. You know, when you look at a Huawei router, at least some of the older generations of Huawei routers, they look a lot like Cisco routers, in part because their IP was taken from Cisco originally. So that's a common concern about Huawei. Another issue is they're in the marketplace. They're undercutting folks from an economic perspective because of the huge benefits they gain from the Chinese government, these low interest loans and the like. And then from a national security perspective, the CEO has been asked directly, look, will you agree to not engage in surveillance on behalf of the Chinese government? He's refused to agree to do that. And look, he's got close ties. He's a former Chinese military officer himself. And so these are the challenges. You've got to be willing to say we won't do those things if you're going to be trusted to build telecommunications infrastructure.
So how big is this threat? Do you think China could shut off 5G capabilities or actually listen in?
Well, it's unlikely that China would shut off those capabilities. You know, we never know what might happen in a conflict scenario, but we're not talking about that. China, of course, benefits hugely from a robust telecommunications infrastructure, and so this idea they might shut it down completely is an unlikely scenario. The more likely scenario, as you lay out, Emily, is the potential for espionage, both economic espionage, which we know China engages in, and the classic type of nation-state espionage where they're stealing secrets to benefit their foreign affairs and their national security policies.
How successful have both sides been in their campaigns? I mean, we've really seen Huawei going on the offensive, I should say, with the civil suit in Canada. We're now hearing a report in the New York Times suggesting that they're preparing to sue the U.S. government to challenge the ban. On the other side, you've got the U.S. rallying its allies to try and get other countries to ban it as well. Have we seen degrees of kind of, I guess, ham-fistedness on both sides?
I think you're right. There has been a bit of ham-fistedness on both sides. You know, look, the U.S. has been successful in convincing allies like Australia to largely keep Huawei out of the infrastructure. That being said, we haven't been successful in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, British Telecom has bought a tremendous amount of Huawei gear, and the National Cybersecurity Center in England has made clear that their idea is to look at this on a case-by-case basis and analyze each piece of equipment. That can be difficult to scale, but these are some of the challenges that both the United States and other allied nations are working through right now. And you're right, Huawei has really gone on the offensive and been very aggressive both on their pricing and their advocacy.
Is there a sufficient investment, given that we talk about Huawei really being the dominant player in this space, and you said you really need to question who owns this infrastructure? Is it a little bit late for countries, governments, and private companies to be playing catch-up in terms of the enormous amount of incentive and investment the Chinese have put behind this?
No, you're exactly right. They've put a tremendous amount of money into Huawei, given it very good benefits under Chinese law and with these low interest loans or no interest loans at times also. And so Huawei really is able to come in and build huge amounts of infrastructure and sell its products at dramatically cheaper than the market rate, in part because they have these benefits and they can create these economies of scale based on these economic benefits. So it does make it very hard to compete. And you're right, we are behind the 8 ball. The U.S. and its allies are playing a really hard game of catch up in this scenario today.
All right, Jamil, thank you so much for joining us. Jamil Jaffer of IronNet joining us there. Well, lots more to come here on Bloomberg Television, so do stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Time now for the first installment of our Work Shifted series, where we take a look at the intersection of tech and the workplace. Amazon is the latest company facing the rise of worker activism. A group of hundreds of working moms, known as Mamazonians, want the tech giant to start offering backup daycare, a benefit already offered by several of the largest tech companies. The group is set to meet with senior managers in coming weeks, arguing the benefit will help Amazon retain its talented women. We are joined now by a veteran of tech workplace culture, former Netflix chief talent officer Patty McCord, who helped shape the company's revolutionary work environment, also the author of a book called Powerful about the workplace. Patty, always good to have you here on the show. So how should Jeff Bezos respond to these Mamazonians? And by the way, do we like that word?
Nah, I'm not such a fan of Mamazonians, although I get it. I think women are suffer more than men in the workplace for taking care of their families. But I wish it was like, I don't know, parental zonians or something, because, you know, in my fantasy future, families and work can blend together so that we can all have healthy lives. And that includes other moms and other dads and all the different ways we put together family these days.
So should Jeff Bezos be offering backup daycare? Isn't it kind of a given at many of the big companies?
Emily, I have to tell you a story. I don't know if I've told you this before, but when you and I met, these many months ago, before you had released Brotopia, you asked me about on-site daycare, you asked me about supplemental daycare, and I said to you, with my reptilian HR brain intact, oh, Emily, that's really hard to do. You don't understand. There's facilities issues, and there's finance issues, and there's liability issues, and having kids at work is really problematic, and subsidizing daycare is really hard. And you looked at me and you said, oh, I wish I had talked to you before the book. And then I read your book on my way to a gig that I was doing in Austin. So I go into this conference in Austin, and on stage is the head of HR at Patagonia. And he says, I just met today a young man that we hired as an intern that I met originally when he was 6 weeks old in our on-site daycare. Patagonia has done daycare for 30 years. Right? And so all I could think about was all of the companies here in San Francisco that I go into who have a bartender on payroll. I mean, you would think if we can address the needs and happiness of everybody having a bartender at work, we can certainly think about what's the right thing to do about having healthy families.
Thank you for that anecdote, Patty. And you're right, Patagonia has broken ground in this area for 30 years, and very few companies, to be honest, have slowly followed. Why is it so hard?
I think it's because it's not perceived to be directly affecting the customer. And in most cases, what we want to do at work is we want to create products and services for the people that buy them from us. I mean, that's mostly what we focus on.
Except,
but I think,
hang on, it's something that directly affects the employee more than anything else.
Yeah, I totally get it. And I don't think I got it until now, right? I look back at my life and I realized that a really big key to my enormous success was my stay-at-home husband. And I know that that's a factor because I've been doing this for 30 years, that's a really important factor to being able to be successful at work. And so we have to change our minds about what that is and how we can, using all the technology that we have, how come we can figure out how to video conference all across the world and have global organizations. And we should think about integrating families in that same way, too. There's no reason we can't innovate here.
Now, I want to talk to you about another story that broke today. Google saying it conducted a study to get to the bottom of pay inequity and found that it was underpaying men. This, as the Department of Labor is in the middle of a huge investigation into pay inequity at Google and accuses the company of underpaying women. You also have a class action lawsuit among women against Google who say they are underpaid. How do you square this?
I just read the same story like 5 minutes ago, and I didn't read it deeply. Here's the thing about broad brush reporting on things like this. What's Google have? Over 100,000 employees, so I don't really know who they're talking to here. But I don't have any problem with equal pay being equal pay. I just don't really understand which salaries we're addressing in this particular case.
Google, in a statement, I should say, says our pay inequity analysis ensures that compensation is fair for employees in the same job at the same level, location, and performance. But we do know that's only part of the story because leveling, performance ratings, and promotion impact pay. This year, we're undertaking a comprehensive review of these processes to make sure outcomes are fair. Now, Patty, you've been on a tour since you wrote your book. You've been thinking a lot about workplace culture. What are some things that you think Silicon Valley has been doing wrong that Silicon Valley thinks is right, but need to change?
Oh, I mean, you articulated it so well in Brotopia, Emily. It's like, I know who gets promoted because I've been in the room when we've made the decisions. It's somebody that you know. It's somebody that you already have a relationship with. It's somebody who is, I often say that people say to themselves, we need somebody smart and quick on their feet and really articulate and bright, someone just like me. And then we hire and promote the same people over and over again because like hires like hires like hires like. And conversely, when I hear the Silicon Valley thing of, well, we'd have more women in management, more women on boards, it's a pipeline issue. I always say, well, if you open your eyes, your pipeline is sitting in front of you.
Absolutely.
So, we are very, very diverse organizations out here. And what we don't do is we don't provide the same opportunity and exposure to everybody. And that's the thing that we haven't gotten right and we need to start paying a lot more attention to. Just so that we have enough great people to do the great things that we have to do here.
We only have about a minute left, Patty. If you could rewrite that Netflix culture code, what would you keep and what would you get rid of?
Oh, the culture code, that document was rewritten and amended over a 10-year period, and it's constantly being done now. So what you don't see when you look at it is how many things were discarded and how many new things were added. Reed rewrote it last year, I think, and one of the beautiful things he added to it was the idea of global diversity and cultural diversity and the idea of really making room for everybody to do great work.
All right, former Netflix Chief Talent Officer Patty McCord. Always great to have you here on the show. Thank you so much, Patty, for stopping by.
Thank you, Emily.
And telling us how work is shifting.
See you soon.
All right, still ahead, Lyft races to the public markets, but who are the real winners in this deal? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Electronic Arts said 50 million players have signed up for its Apex Legends video game in the title's first month. To compare, Fortnite, also free in its popular Battle Royale format, took 4 months to reach 40 million players, but now has a registered base of more than 200 million. Well, a Japanese retail billionaire, rather than a Silicon Valley giant, is poised to be the biggest beneficiary of Lyft's impending IPO. Hiroshi Mikitani's Rakuten owns 13.1% of the ride-hailing company's Class A shares, according to regulatory filings. That would be worth about $2 billion if Lyft goes public, with a valuation in the middle of its anticipated $20 to $25 billion range. Here to discuss the ride-sharing company's IPO and his broader outlook on tech, Eric Hippo, Managing Director of Laro Hippo. Good to have you back here on the show.
Welcome to New York.
So who wins when Lyft goes public?
Well, this gentleman probably will win something. I think the existing shareholders, it gives them a path to liquidity. That's great for them, particularly the ones who came in earlier. Perhaps the drivers, they're being offered the ability to buy some stock, and I think that the business model will have to change kind of in favor of the drivers, give them more money. The company has lost $2.3 billion in the past 3 years, lost $900+ million last year.
It's a lot. I mean, they're losing almost half of what they bring in.
Yeah, that's right. And it's, you know, the top line is like 2.2 billion, so maybe it'll be $3-4 billion this year. So no question, it's a good company, but it's hard to understand from the S1 what the profitability model looks like and what the unit economics look like in order for this company to be profitable.
Investors are used to giving tech companies a pass when they're losing money, but is this an extreme amount of money to be losing proportionate to what they're bringing in?
To me, it is. And of course, we're also talking about perhaps an Uber IPO, which I think loses even more money.
So you think Uber's model looks worse?
Well, it's the same model, except it's bigger.
Well, they have different businesses, though. They've got Uber Eats.
Yeah.
You know, they're more penetrated in self-driving, flying cars.
Yeah, all of these are investments,
Yeah.
I guess. Lyft is also into, you know, they own the city bike system here in New York, and they're getting into scooters. So all of that requires, you know, a lot of capital, a lot of investments, and it's not clear why the core business can't make money.
So where are you investing right now?
We primarily invest in New York-based companies, so we reflect what New York is good at. We have a large portfolio in direct-to-consumer commerce companies. We also do we're starting to do a lot of digital health. New York is a big center for healthcare. There's a lot of great ideas in order to simplify healthcare, give better care to people more directly, bypassing all these different kind of levels and intermediaries. We invest in AI, we invest in automation in general. We kind of reflect really what New York is good at.
Laro Hippo also took over Binary Capital's portfolio. This is where Justin Caldbeck was ousted over sexual harassment allegations. He was sort of the first investor to be exposed in Silicon Valley's Me Too movement. Why did you decide to take over their portfolio?
Well, some of the LPs, some of the larger LPs of the binary funds asked us if we would take over the portfolio. We have experience in doing that because we also manage and are the successor GP of 2 of the SoftBank early stage funds. So we learned in doing that it's complementary to our business. We can attach it to our back end and all of our compliance and audits and all of this. And we can supply a lot of support to these portfolio companies.
Did you feel like there were any ethical issues, or more that you were rescuing these companies that didn't have anything to do with this, unfortunately?
Yeah, for the ethical issues, you know, we're part of the old LP-GP relationship. None of that transferred over to the new relationship. We looked at the portfolio. We felt that it was very complementary. We have at least one company, Dia, in common with Binary, a very successful company, growing very, very fast. So for us, it was a question: is can we add value? Can we really get these entrepreneurs back on track? And
Dia makes, how would you describe it?
I'm sorry?
Dia.
Oh, Dia is the leader in the plus-size women category.
And they're killing it, right?
They're killing it. It's a huge category. They're very successful.
Now, what are your thoughts on HQ2? Is that a huge loss for New York?
I don't think long-term it's a huge loss for New York. It's a lost opportunity. New York City, like all big urban areas, have to become tech cities. And we are, you know, tech is going to replace our traditional centers of wealth, such as Wall Street or real estate. And we, by losing out on the capability of bringing 25,000 people, plus all of the adjacent jobs that it brings, all in one go over years, obviously, but from one company, it's a big loss.
New York has a thriving tech ecosystem, but still hasn't had a $10 billion tech company. Maybe that's not the right metric, but when does that happen?
I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm not in that kind of prediction, but we do have at least 10 $1 billion companies, and actually quite many more.
I'm going to have to count them to make sure you're right.
And many more. So there's a bulge of really successful, well-funded companies that's coming up in New York. And maybe out of those will come.
What about WeWork? Do you think? I mean,
yeah.
It's a very controversial company, but.
No, I think WeWork is a great business. Yes, WeWork might be the very first. I don't know if they'll go public this year, maybe next year, but they certainly have the potential of being one of those. All
right, Lara Hippo, managing partner. Always good to see you here in New York. Thank you so much for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We're going to continue to broadcast from New York Tuesday. I'll be speaking with the CEO of Boxed, the CEO of TransferWise, one of the biggest fintech firms out of Europe. And we're live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.